Hi, welcome to Bodhi Prep. My name is Brajesh, and here we have a very good reading comprehension passage. This passage is from history. I would not say it is from history, but it talks about history. So it tries to give you a historical perspective of something. Now, the point I'm trying to make here is that while reading RC passages, try to create blocks of information and try to connect them. And let's read this passage. So I will tell you exactly what I mean by creating blocks of information. Now, this is the first paragraph. So I have to focus on the first paragraph and see what the first para has to say. The 20th century was not a permanent plunge into depravity. This is a very important word. Even if you don't know the meaning, let's go ahead. We are aware of the cliche, the 20th century was the bloodiest in history. So the word cliche also not known to many people. That has been used to indict a vast range of demons, including atheism, science, capitalism, communism, etc. But is this true? Now, many of you, when you read these sentences, you will realize that this is a very vocabulary heavy sentence. There is a word depravity, there is a word cliche, that there was indict, and you don't know what these words mean. I would say that when you don't understand these words, there is no need to worry about it. You can go ahead and see what next. The claim is rarely backed up by death tolls from any century other than 20th. The 20th century also had more people. The population of the world in 1950 was 2.5 billion, which is about 2.5 times the population in 1800, 4.5 times that in 1600, even 7 times that in 1300, and 15 times that of 1 CE. So the death count of war in 1600 would have to be multiplied by 4.5 for us to compare its destructiveness to the destructiveness of a war in the middle of the 19th century. So this is where you understand that the author is giving some sort of statistics. He is giving statistics of what? The number of people populating the earth in any given era. So in 1950, you had these many people. In 1800, you had these many people, and so on and so forth. What is he exactly trying to say? Well, many of you might not be clear about it, but this is where vocabulary becomes very important. For example, it says here that the 20th century was not a permanent plunge into depravity. Now, if you know the meaning of the word depravity, you would definitely have a better understanding of this passage. Depravity basically means moral downfall. So let's try to understand. Depravity means moral downfall, यानी कि morally कम हो जाना. So the author says that 20th century was not a permanent plunge into depravity. That means 20th century is believed by people to be a time or era of moral downfall, but that is not the case, right? And he says that people believe it was the bloodiest in history. So what is he trying to say? He's trying to say that the 20th century was not a period of moral downfall. Because if you look at the numbers, then there are different numbers of people on the planet at different time era, and you need to basically multiply by 4.5 to match the population, and from that you will get to know the destructiveness of war in 20th century with a war, let's say, in this era or in this era or in this era. So he's trying to draw a proportional thing. Another illusion is historical myopia. The closer an era is to our vantage point in the present, the more details of the same can be gathered. Historical myopia. So what is myopia? Myopia basically means short-sightedness. Historical myopia can afflict both common sense and professional history. The cognitive psychologists Amos Tversky, Daniel Kahneman have shown that people intuitively estimate relative frequency using a shortcut called the availability heuristic. The easier it is to recall examples of an event, the more probable people think it is. So you have to understand that the author says the closer something is, the more details you can gather. So 20th century is very close to us. So we know more about it. And because we know more about it, we think that it is the bloodiest in history. The author says that even 1800 could have been the bloodiest in history. Even 1300 could have been the bloodiest. Even the 1 CE era could have been the bloodiest. So the author says that basically we all suffer from historical myopia. He says that this is called as intuitively estimating frequency using a shortcut called the availability heuristic. The easier it is for people to recall an event, the more probable you think about it. So you can recall events of 20th century more, and therefore you think about it more, and therefore you think that the 20th century was the most destructive. People overestimate the likelihoods of the kinds of accidents that make headlines, such as plane crashes, shark attacks, and terrorist bombings. And they underestimate those that pile up unremarked, like electrocutions, falls, and drownings. So because COVID-19 is being talked about all the time, you overestimate it. And because let's say malaria or let's say some other kind of disease is not talked about, you underestimate it, right? So this is a psychological problem that we have. And history is looked at with this psychological problem. So the author seems to be driving the point that we all believe that 20th century was the bloodiest, but this is not true because we suffer from historical myopia. When one corrects for the availability bias and the 20th century population explosion, one comes across many wars and massacres that could hold their head high among 20th century atrocities. Taking into account population differences with past societies, Steven Pinker develops an adjusted rank. This is what happens in your CAT exam. CAT 2021, someone scored, let's say 84 marks. In CAT, in CAT, let's say 26, 2006, someone scored, let's say 112 marks. How are you going to balance these two? So you'll have to adjust the rank. Steven Pinker develops an adjusted rank with adjusted death tolls based on mid 20th century equivalent to come up with a new ranking. The new ranking list includes not just deaths on the battlefield but indirect deaths of civilians from starvation disease. So Steven Pinker has come with some sort of new way of ranking. Had you even heard of all the great atrocities from time immemorial? I hadn't. I suspect many readers will be surprised to learn that of the 21 worst things that people have ever done to each other, 14 were in centuries before the 20th. So here we have a revelation. Out of the 21 worst things that has happened, 14 were in centuries before the 20th. And all this pertains to absolute numbers. When you scale by population size, of course, you have to do the scaling up because we had more people in 20th century. So numbers should not be the only guide, right? So when you scale by population size, only one of the 20th century's atrocities even makes the top 10. So the author says basically that when you go by by Steven Pinker's model, you realize that on a scale of population size, only one of the 20th century's atrocities makes in the top 10. The others don't. And so by this, what he's trying to prove? By this, he's trying to prove the first sentence of the passage, that 20th century was not a permanent plunge into depravity. And where is the evidence? The evidence comes towards the end when he says that if you go by Steven Pinker's model, you find that only one event or one atrocity of the 20th century makes it in the top 10. The others don't belong to 20th century. They belong to some other century, right? These figures, of course, cannot be taken at face value. Some tendenciously blame the entire death toll of famine or epidemic on particular war, rebellion, or tyrant. And some came from innumerable cultures that lacked modern techniques for counting and record keeping. At the same time, narrative history confirms that earlier civilizations were certainly capable of killing in vast numbers. So this is very important. Earlier civilizations were also capable of killing in vast numbers. Technological backwardness was no impediment. We know from Rwanda and Cambodia that massive numbers of people can be murdered with low-tech means like machetes and starvation. And in the distant past, implements of killing were not always so low-tech because military weaponry usually boasted the most advanced technology of that age. So the author says that it's not that technology was there only in the modern century, it was there before as well. And there are many ways by which you might kill. So, people see, I don't understand much of what is being said here in these sentences. I don't understand much. But what he says here becomes very clear that innumerable cultures that lacked modern techniques for counting and record keeping also have had some sort of killing. Killing was there in Rwanda, it was there in Cambodia, it was done through starvation, and killing is not always low tech. Why? Because military weaponry usually boasted the most advanced technology of the age. So it's not that the old cultures did not have technology. They had technology, of course, but if you compare their technology with their age, the technology was definitely advanced. What is he trying to prove? He's trying to prove just one thing, that many people who believe that the 20th century was a permanent plunge into depravity are wrong. Why they are wrong? First of all, we have the numbers and we have to extrapolate the numbers, or we have to basically normalize the way it happens in CAT to compare 20th century with the other centuries. And secondly, we have historical myopia because we have more data about the present. We think that the present is far worse than the past. And then he goes with some sort of psychological study, which he puts in second paragraph. Then he talks about Steven Pinker in the third paragraph, and Pinker has come in support of the author's point of view. Pinker has given some sort of adjusted rank, and from that we get to know that if you go with the top 10 atrocities, only one comes from 20th century, the rest are from centuries before 20th century, right? And then he gives examples of other civilizations where killing and atrocities have happened and they don't fall in the 20th century but before the 20th century. So this was apparently a very, difficult to read passage full of vocabulary. But yes, in the first 3 4 sentences there were lots of words, but if you knew the meaning of this word, it would have actually cleared the entire passage for you. That the author is arguing that the 20th century was not a permanent plunge into depravity. He's trying to say that 20th century was not a period of moral corruption. And the reason we think so is because of historical myopia. And why we have historical myopia? Because of the reasons given here in this paragraph. Then he gives a better way, and that is Steven Pinker's adjusted rank. Correct? So what happens is, people, I have just understood around 30% of the content. Lots of things I haven't understood. But this is what I always tell. You have to understand the broader picture. Once you understand the broader picture, it becomes easy for you to get a grip on the passage. And then you can go to the questions and attack only those passages or only those questions which you think are very much connected with the central idea of the passage. And you can go to that part of the passage, try to find the answer, and the chances are that you will get the answer. So this is the way you have to read passages, people. Don't fear passages, whether they are from philosophy or geography or history or from any other domain. Thank you.